Most people know Julius Caesar as the man who conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and changed the shape of the Roman world forever. They know the Senate, the knife, the famous last words. They know the story that ends in blood on the floor of the theater of Pompey. But there is an earlier story, a stranger story, a story that almost every historian mentions in passing and then moves on from too quickly, as if the implications are somehow too awkward to sit with for very long. It is the story of the 25-year-old Caesar, broke and relatively unknown, sailing through the Aegean Sea on his way to study rhetoric on the island of Rhodes, when Cilician pirates intercepted his vessel, boarded it, and took him captive. That much is agreed upon. What happened next is where the record becomes genuinely extraordinary. Because Caesar did not behave like a hostage. He behaved like the pirates were working for him. He insulted them when their poetry bored him. He ordered them to be quiet when he wanted to sleep. He participated in their athletic games and then reminded them, with what every ancient source describes as complete seriousness, that he intended to return and have every single one of them crucified. They laughed. They thought this patrician Roman with the sharp tongue and the theatrical confidence was simply performing bravado to protect his dignity. They had no way of knowing that he meant it literally, methodically, and that he would make good on that promise with a precision and speed that shocked even the people who knew him best. This is the story of the men who kidnapped Julius Caesar, what they wanted, what they got, and what he did to them the moment he was free. To understand who these pirates were, you have to understand the Mediterranean in the 1st century before the Common Era, because the sea in that period was not the controlled, patrolled maritime space we imagine when we think of ancient Roman power. It was the opposite. The Roman Republic in the decades before Caesar's birth had allowed piracy to grow into something that looked less like crime and more like a parallel economy, a shadow civilization operating openly across the eastern Mediterranean, with its own ports, its own supply chains, its own diplomatic relationships with coastal cities that found it more profitable to cooperate than to resist. The Cilicians, based along the rocky southern coast of what is now Turkey, were the most organized and the most powerful of all the pirate groups operating in that era. They were not desperate men stealing bread. They had fleets, they had strongholds, they had infrastructure. At their peak, ancient sources estimate the Cilician pirates operated more than 1,000 ships and controlled territory spanning multiple coastlines. They raided Roman grain shipments. They sacked coastal towns. They kidnapped Roman citizens for ransom so routinely that it had become, for the Mediterranean upper class, a recognized, if deeply unpleasant, category of misfortune. The kind of thing that happened, the kind of thing families prepared for financially, the kind of thing that filled the correspondence of Roman administrators with tedious logistical complaints about ransom negotiations and prisoner exchanges. Caesar's capture happened around 75 BC, roughly 3 years before he would hold his first significant public office, roughly 3 decades before he would stand at the peak of Roman power. He was young, he was traveling with a small retinue of friends and servants, and he had no military force to protect him. When the Cilician ships appeared and the boarding began, there was nothing to be done except submit and begin the calculation of what survival would require. The pirates sent word to his family and associates that a ransom of 20 talents of silver was expected for his release. 20 talents was substantial. It represented years of income for an ordinary Roman family. For a pirate operation already pulling in enormous sums from the grain trade and coastal raids, it was a respectable opening demand. It signaled that they understood approximately who they had captured. Someone educated, someone connected, someone whose family would pay to get him back. What they did not anticipate was Caesar's response to the number. He told them 20 talents was an insult. He told them he was worth at least 50. This detail, preserved in Plutarch's Life of Caesar and confirmed in various forms by multiple ancient sources, is one of those moments in historical biography that seems almost too perfectly revealing to be true, except that it is consistent with everything else we know about how Caesar operated for the rest of his life. He was not performing. He was not trying to manipulate the pirates into believing he was more valuable than he was. He genuinely found the original number offensive, and he said so, and he negotiated the ransom upward on his own behalf because he believed the lower figure reflected poorly on his status. The pirates, by all accounts, were delighted by this. They had expected fear, or at minimum, the careful cooperation of someone trying to minimize his discomfort. Instead, they had something far more interesting. They had a hostage who seemed more annoyed at them than frightened. While the messengers went out to collect the ransom from Caesar's contacts in Asia Minor, a process that would take approximately 38 days, Caesar remained on the pirate ships. And this is where the record becomes genuinely strange to read, because what follows is not the account of a man enduring captivity. It is the account of a man who found an audience and used it. He wrote poetry and read it aloud to the pirates, and when their reaction disappointed him, he told them directly that they had no taste, that they were illiterate barbarians who failed to appreciate what they were hearing. He gave speeches, apparently at length, and when the pirates showed insufficient enthusiasm, he called them uneducated. He participated in their games and exercises with genuine competitive intensity. He slept when he wished and demanded quiet when he slept, and according to Plutarch, when the noise outside his quarters failed to diminish quickly enough, he sent men out to tell the pirates to keep it down, and they did. A group of professional kidnappers with 1,000 ships and no particular reason to accommodate the comfort demands of a Roman prisoner kept it down because he asked them to. That detail alone tells you something about the quality of presence Caesar projected even at 25, even in captivity, even with no leverage whatsoever. But the detail that no ancient source can resist, the detail that every historian who touches this story mentions because it is so precisely characteristic of what Caesar would later become, is the crucifixion promise. He told the pirates repeatedly, directly, without apparent irony or performative rage, that when he was released, he would return, capture every one of them, and have them crucified. The pirates, by all accounts, laughed. This was interpreted as the kind of thing a proud Roman aristocrat would say to preserve his dignity. It was, presumably, the sort of dramatic statement men in his position made regularly, a rhetorical assertion of superiority that everyone understood to be theater rather than intention. The pirates liked him for it, apparently. Plutarch describes the relationship as almost warm, noting that Caesar's boldness and freedom of speech amused them, and that they treated him with what passed for courtesy in their context. They had completely misread him. The ransom arrived. 50 talents of silver, the number Caesar himself had set, was delivered, and he was released. He sailed to the nearest Roman-administered port, which was Miletus, and there he did something that no one who had been taken and ransomed and released was expected to do, that no treaty or custom or legal obligation required him to do, that he had no official authority or standing to do. He organized a fleet. He did it immediately, with his own personal resources and with borrowed ships, moving with the kind of focused urgency that suggests he had spent at least some portion of those 38 days planning exactly this. Within weeks of his release, he was back on the water with multiple vessels heading toward the anchorage where the pirates had been camped. They were still there. This is the part of the story that becomes genuinely difficult to explain if you approach it as a straightforward account of Roman justice, because Caesar had no official authorization for what he did next. He was not acting as a Roman magistrate. He was not executing a military commission. He was a private citizen pursuing a personal grievance with his own resources, acting on a promise he had made to men who had laughed at him in waters he had no formal jurisdiction over. He arrived at the anchorage. He found the pirates still present with most of the ransom money still among their possessions, and he captured them. The speed of the operation, the fact that the pirates were caught before they had dispersed or moved on, suggests either extraordinary luck or careful intelligence gathering during the captivity itself. That those 38 days had not been entirely occupied with poetry readings and athletic competition, that Caesar had been watching, listening, cataloging, building a picture of where these men lived and how they operated and what would be required to find them again. He brought them back to Pergamon, the nearest Roman administrative center, with the intention of handing them over to the Roman governor of Asia, a man named Marcus Junctus, for formal prosecution and execution. And here the story takes another turn because Junctus declined. The reasons offered in ancient sources vary slightly depending on who is telling the story. But the most consistent explanation is that Junctus had other plans for the pirates, specifically that he was interested in selling them into slavery rather than executing them, a financially attractive option that would have generated significant revenue and avoided the complications of a formal legal proceeding. There is also the possibility, suggested by some historians, that Junctus simply wanted to exercise his authority over what had happened in his jurisdiction, and resented a young private citizen arriving with a captured pirate fleet and expecting the administrative machinery of Roman Asia to process them according to his personal instructions. Caesar did not wait to find out which explanation was accurate. He went back to Pergamon, took the prisoners back into his own custody, and had them crucified himself. This is where the account splits slightly between sources, and the difference matters in a way that reveals something important about how Caesar wanted to be understood, both by his contemporaries and by the historical record. Some accounts say he simply had them crucified, full stop, exactly as promised, the standard execution method for pirates and criminals of low status under Roman custom. Other accounts, including the most detailed version in Plutarch, note that Caesar had their throats cut first before the crosses as a gesture of mercy toward men he had come to know over the previous 5 weeks. He kept his promise to crucify them. He also, according to this version, softened the death itself because the relationship had been something other than pure hostility. Both versions end in the same place. The pirates who kidnapped Julius Caesar were executed on his personal authority, funded by his personal resources, in defiance of a sitting Roman governor's alternative plans, at a time when Caesar held no official office and had no legal standing to order anyone's execution. The Roman governor of Asia did nothing about it. The Senate in Rome noted the incident and moved on. And Caesar, having recovered most of the ransom money, having eliminated the men who had dared to put a price on him, having demonstrated in the most direct possible terms what it meant to threaten his dignity, continued on to Rhodes to study rhetoric as originally planned. The story of the Cilician pirates and Julius Caesar is usually treated as a colorful anecdote, an early indicator of the character that would later reshape the Roman world, a biographical footnote that helps explain who he was before he became who history remembers. And it is those things. But it is also something more if you stay with it long enough to look at what it reveals about the Roman world in that period and about the nature of the man who would eventually consume it. Consider what it took for Caesar to do what he did. Not the courage, which was obviously considerable, but the specific kind of confidence it requires to sit as a prisoner on the ship of men who are holding you for ransom and tell them you are going to kill them when you leave. Not as a threat, not as a negotiating tactic, but as a statement of future fact. The pirates took it as theater because they were reading it through the lens of what most men would mean by it, which was nothing. Caesar meant it precisely, and the difference between what he felt and what they understood is the gap that explains everything that followed. He had no doubt whatsoever that he would do what he said. He had a kind of inner certainty about his own capacity that was so total it registered to outside observers not as arrogance, but as a kind of settled authority, a gravitational quality that made people, even professional kidnappers, with every reason to dismiss him, instinctively accommodate his preferences without quite knowing why. The rhetorical training he had sought out on Rhodes was not an accident of biography. Caesar understood earlier than almost anyone in his generation that power in the Roman world was inseparable from language. The Senate ran on speech. The courts ran on speech. The popular assemblies ran on speech. Military authority was granted through speech, maintained through speech, defended through speech. The man who could control how a story was told was the man who controlled what the story meant. And the man who controlled what stories meant controlled how people remembered events, how they evaluated leaders, how they decided where loyalty belonged. Caesar's poetry readings to the Cilician pirates were not vanity. They were practice. They were the exercise of a man who intended to use language as a primary instrument of power, and who saw no reason to let 38 days of captivity go to waste when he could use them to refine his craft on whatever audience happened to be available. The ransom itself is worth examining more carefully than it usually receives. Caesar negotiating his own ransom upward is funny on the surface. It is also a demonstration of something important about how he evaluated the relationship between perceived value and actual power. 20 talents and 50 talents were not just different amounts of money. They implied different categories of person. A 20-talent man was significant but not exceptional, a wealthy Roman worth recovering but not one whose name carried particular weight. A 50-talent man was someone the pirates would remember, someone whose release would be discussed, someone whose name the people who paid would mention to other people. Caesar was not yet famous enough for the original demand to have reflected his future stature. He saw the gap between where he stood and where he intended to be, and he declined to allow even a pirate ransom to define him as something less than what he planned to become. The aftermath of the kidnapping also deserves more attention than it typically receives in accounts that treat it as a straightforward story of revenge. Caesar's pursuit of the pirates was not legally simple. Roman private citizens did not, as a routine matter, organize their own naval operations to pursue and execute criminals in provincial waters. The fact that he did this, that he moved immediately and decisively without waiting for official authorization, and that no one in the Roman administrative or legal system appears to have treated it as a serious violation of proper procedure, tells you something about how Roman power actually operated in that period, which was to say, imperfectly, inconsistently, and with a significant premium placed on results over process, when the person producing the results was credible enough. Caesar arrived with the pirates captured and the ransom largely recovered. That was the result. The method was unusual, but the outcome was clean. Marcus Junctus may have been irritated, but he had no compelling case that Caesar had done anything Rome would formally condemn, particularly when the alternative was Junctus enriching himself by selling the captives rather than serving the Roman interest in eliminating a known piracy operation. What the episode established in the record that would eventually reach Plutarch and Suetonius and the other sources who preserved it was a template for how Caesar operated that would remain consistent for the rest of his life. He made specific promises and kept them. He moved faster than people expected. He operated at the boundary of what existing authority structures permitted and treated the boundary not as a constraint, but as a starting position. He recovered costs and then some, turning what should have been a net loss of 50 talents and 6 weeks of time into a demonstration of personal capacity that cost his enemies everything. He was merciful in the specific sense of not inflicting unnecessary suffering beyond what he had promised, which is a different thing from being gentle, a different thing from being lenient, but which he understood was an important distinction in how people would later remember him. The Cilician pirate problem did not end with Caesar's personal intervention at Pergamon. The broader crisis of Mediterranean piracy was so severe by the early 70s BC that it had begun to threaten Rome's grain supply, which was not an abstraction, but a direct threat to the stability of the Republic. Grain riots were a political crisis. A grain shortage was potentially a civilizational one. The Senate, after years of inadequate responses and failed military campaigns against the Cilician fleets, eventually granted extraordinary powers to Pompey the Great in 67 BC to address the problem at scale. Pompey's campaign against the Mediterranean pirates was one of the most efficiently executed military operations in Roman history. He swept the sea in sections, driving pirate fleets toward each other and toward the coast, destroying their bases and their ships in a campaign that lasted approximately 3 months and effectively ended organized Cilician piracy as a functioning institution. Tens of thousands of pirates were captured. Most were settled on agricultural land in underpopulated regions of the Roman world, rather than executed, a decision that reflected both Pompey's genuine concern with building a stable Mediterranean economy and his instinctive preference for solutions that could be presented as magnanimous without sacrificing the underlying strategic goal. By the time Caesar rose to real prominence, the Cilician pirates who had held him captive were a dissolved network, their power broken by Pompey's campaign, their bases dismantled, their leaders scattered or dead. The specific men Caesar had captured and crucified were already a memory. But the episode lived in the Roman consciousness as a story that was told and retold because it was so precisely characteristic of what made Caesar what he was: the absolute refusal to accept a diminished definition of himself, the speed of movement once he had decided on a course of action, the literal precision with which he honored threats that everyone else had dismissed as rhetoric. Enemies who came later, men who had access to this story and who understood what it meant, must have recognized what it implied about the consequences of underestimating him. Not all of them adjusted their behavior accordingly. Most of them paid for that mistake. What the pirate story asks us to consider, if we are willing to stay with it rather than treating it as a footnote on the way to the more famous chapters, is what it means for a person to know themselves that completely. Caesar at 25 was not yet Caesar in the historical sense. He had no conquests, no consulship, no crossing of any Rubicon. He had a name, a family connection to a declining patrician line, some education, and a quality of presence that made professional pirates accommodate his sleep schedule. And he had an interior certainty so complete that it functioned as a kind of advance autobiography, a fully formed conviction about what he was and what he would do that preceded any of the evidence that would later justify it. Most people's confidence is downstream of their achievements. Caesar's achievements were downstream of his confidence. The pirates encountered that confidence in its early form, in a context where it had no external justification whatsoever, and they still felt it clearly enough to find him remarkable. They just failed to understand what it meant. They interpreted the promise of crucifixion as theater. They were wrong because they were measuring him against the category of person who makes that kind of statement, which is to say, the category of person who says dramatic things in difficult situations to manage how they feel and how others perceive them. Caesar was not managing anything. He was simply describing what was going to happen. The distance between those two things, between a man performing certainty and a man expressing it, is invisible from the outside, which is why the pirates missed it, why they laughed, why they were still in the same anchorage 38 days later when he came back with ships. The men who kidnapped Julius Caesar did not understand what they had. They had the future master of the Roman world as a captive audience for 5 weeks, and they entertained themselves with his boldness and his sharp tongue and his insistence on 50 talents instead of 20. And they thought they were watching a performance. They were watching a man practice being himself in the only arena available to him, sharpening the instrument he would use for the next 40 years against whatever target was at hand. Reading his poetry to pirates in the Aegean, not because he had any illusion about their literary appreciation, but because speaking well in front of a hostile audience was a skill he intended to need, and wasting an opportunity to practice it would have been the kind of inefficiency he did not permit himself. He told them he would crucify them. He crucified them. Everything that came after was, in some sense, the same story on a larger stage.